Many people believe that violence in films and video games impact the consumer into replicating the violence that they consume. But is that the case? An interview with Quentin Tarantino came out, and he was asked about his opinions on violence in movies. He talks about how he walks the line between having the violence there for a purpose and have it not be gratuitous violence. As part of my research, I watched a lot of video essays about violence in movies and video games, and they talk about how they feel that children can detach from the video games and tell the difference between what happens in the video game and what happens in the real world. Violence in movies and video games help the audience feel a certain type of emotion that they wouldn't really get if it wasn't for that film or video game. Violence in video games give the story stakes and gives the audience a reason to watch what the film is showing you. And yeah, I think it's really good, and how the audience has a lot of suspense about what will happen to their protagonist and what will happen to the characters that they really like. Violence can also help the audience feel like they're on a part of the character's journey. Like if the main character, watches something with gruesome violence, and the audience also watch that, then the audience and the main character have a bond, and that gives a reason for the audience to care about what the character is going through. So there's a lot of story devices in which violence in video games and in movies is actually good for character development and good for helping filmmakers tell their stories. Violence can also be an art form in itself, in which if you get the right director, they can make violence look like an art house film, where in the film Raid, or the Raid 2, in which there's great camera work and there's great action scenes, and yes, there's violence, but it's done in an artistic way, and it's great storytelling. It makes you care about what happens, and it makes the audience right in the edge of their seats, and it creates suspense throughout the action scenes, and it's just it's really good filmmaking. And so violence in video games and movies is just a storytelling device. Action films are a big part of Hollywood, and if you look at the films which have the biggest box office, a lot of them are action films. So it sort of shows that audiences do like action and they do like violence. So if you take away that from the filmmaker, then you're taking away a lot of the draw that that film would have, and it takes away a lot of the tools that the filmmaker would have to tell their stories. A lot of the criticism that some action films have, like the MCU, is that they have a lack of stakes, and that comes from when there is a lack of violence, and because the lack of characters die, the audience doesn't really care about what happens because they feel like all the characters are safe, and because there is the lack of violence, there's action, but there's not a lot of violence in it. That's why the audiences lose focus in some of the stories, and they lose focus in some of the characters, and that's a big criticism that the MCU has. The responsibility of people watching these sort of films they're on the parents. The parents get to choose what films their children watch, and so the responsibility isn't on the filmmakers. The filmmakers are just trying to tell their stories and tell it the best way they can, and I think the responsibility should be on the parents to say whether or not they want their children to watch those sort of films. It's not on the media itself. In conclusion, I think the responsibility should be on the parent. I think they should sort of decide on what their young children should watch. It's not the filmmaker's responsibility. Action and violence in video games and movies are just a storytelling device. I feel like if you take away that, then it would the whole industry loses out, and the sort of stories that you can tell through violence, you can't really tell if you take away that. So I feel it's really important. I feel like the people who think that violence shouldn't be in video games and shouldn't be in movies should have the responsibility in not watching them, or not letting their children watch it. It shouldn't be on the filmmakers. It shouldn't be part of the filmmaker's responsibility.